What's going on, everyone? I'm back, and with week one officially in the books and our final two games taking place on Monday Night Football, I'm coming at you today with my week two waiver wire pickups for fantasy, my top guys, so let's get right into it. Starting off at the quarterback position, I'm going to kick it off with the guys that I would target first, and that is Phillip Rivers. Look what he did versus the Kansas City Chiefs this last week. 424 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, albeit in a loss, but he put up very nice numbers versus a divisional opponent in the Chiefs. And now he gets the Buffalo Bills, who are, I've been saying it all offseason, probably the worst team in football. And this is going to be a team that you're going to be targeting as far as defensive pickups that you're going to be streaming, quarterbacks that you're going to be picking up. Basically, they are the Browns of last year. They're the Jaguars of a couple years ago because they are very friendly matchup-wise. You saw what Joe Flacco did to them last week, and I really think Phillip Rivers can do something very similar. For that reason, I really like the upside of a Phillip Rivers week 2. Continuing on with Alex Smith, a guy that doesn't get enough love in the NFL and in fantasy realms. Even though he changed teams this offseason, he still put together a good stat line versus the Cardinals. 255 yards and 2 touchdowns. Even more impressive considering that the Redskins pretty much controlled that game from the get-go. Now, week 2, Smith and the Redskins get the Indianapolis Colts, a very friendly matchup defensively for that Redskins offense. We saw what the Cincinnati Bengals did offensively. Pretty much everyone on that offense had a good game. I think Alex Smith is a better quarterback than Andy Dalton, and Andy Dalton had a very respectable day. I think that entire Redskins offense can again have a nice day. The running backs, the wide receivers, the tight ends versus a Colts defense that's probably going to be in the bottom tier when it comes to defenses in 2018. Moving on to the third and final quarterback on this list, I've got Tyrod Taylor of the Cleveland Browns. And rejoice, Cleveland fans, you are starting the season without a loss. Well, technically without a win too, so maybe don't get too excited quite yet. But nonetheless, Taylor's potential here is really nice considering he was able to put up 197 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception in a storming environment for the majority of that game. But the real upside here, 8 rushes for 77 yards and 1 touchdown, what he can clearly do as a runner. And in week 2, he gets a defensive matchup that initially might have not looked that friendly, but after what the Tampa Bay Bucks and Ryan Fitzpatrick of all people did to the Saints, 40 plus points against them, man, this has people salivating in terms of matchups are concerned. And I think it'll be a very good performance potential, not only for Tyrod Taylor, for Jarvis Landry, for Josh Gordon. So this is a matchup that I'm circling. Tyrod Taylor is probably a guy that I'm circling as well, targeting as a streamable guy. Promising matchup, and especially if some of these defensive woes that we thought the Saints had taken care of in previous years follow them into 2018. Now, a quick asterisk here before I move on to our running backs. Look, Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to be a name that a lot of people are focusing on, and even though he had the best fantasy week in week 1 out of the quarterbacks are concerned, don't go ahead and spend crazy amounts of resources to go ahead and try and add him in week 2. Now, he gets the Philadelphia Eagles this week. That's going to be a very different defense than what we saw in the Saints. So I would hold off on that Ryan Fitzpatrick hype train. Even though what he did was incredibly impressive, I think it'll be a different story in week 2 versus the Eagles. Next, looking at our running backs, and again, starting off with a guy that I would target first, Adrian Peterson, who turned back the clock in week 1, 26 rushes for 96 yards and 1 touchdown. I think he is the guy that you want to target if you are in a standard format, while Chris Thompson, if he's still somehow available, go ahead, add him if you are in a PPR format because he has got that side of the running attack locked down. And like I said, the Redskins have a very nice matchup this week versus a Colts defense that is probably not going to be in the top portion of defenses in 2018. We saw what Joe Mixon was able to do against these guys, and AP, I think, will be that red zone guy. Chris Thompson will be more of that pass catching guy. But again, in your respective formats, AP could be a guy that you target just as well as Chris Thompson can. The second running back on my list is Jalen Richard of the Raiders. And again, this is more of a pass-catching oriented running back from what we saw last night. He is that Sproles-like running back for the Raiders, in my opinion. He only had 5 rushes for 24 yards, but in the passing game, 9 receptions for 55 yards. And again, that's going to be 14 points right off the bat in a PPR format for you. So you can definitely see the appeal there. Nonetheless, not quite as of high ceiling as Adrian Peterson, but week 2, a little bit of a tough week when it comes to additions at the running back position. However, Jalen Richard in PPR formats can be a nice addition. The last guy on this list is Phillip Lindsay, someone that no one was talking about leading up to the season because everyone was on the Royce Freeman hype train. Yet, these guys finished for pretty much the exact same stats, 15 runs for 71 yards for the Broncos. However, where Lindsay separated himself, 2 receptions for 31 yards and a touchdown. To me, Lindsay is a guy that you go ahead and target if you're feeling a little bit nervous about Royce Freeman, because I do think if he continues to have some performances like this, he can go ahead and cut into Royce Freeman's game time. And honestly, they're both rookies, so if Lindsay has some better flashes, I don't take it out of the realm of possibility that the Broncos turn to him as the lead running back. Now again, before I switch to the wide receivers, I do want to make a quick note about TJ Yeldon here, because look, Leonard Fournette obviously got dinged up in week 1, but all reports are that he's going to be fine going into week 2. So for that reason, I'm not mentioning Yeldon here. Again, similar to Fitzpatrick, but more so here, just that the starting running back will be returning. So Yeldon isn't a guy that's high on my watch list for week 2. Moving on to our wide receivers, the first guy I want to highlight here is Tyler Lockett. He finished with 3 receptions for 59 yards and 1 touchdown. Not that impressive. That lone touchdown is what saved his stat line. But look, this is all about potential, because we were all really high on Lockett with all those receivers gone in Seattle, that he'd be the wide receiver number 2 behind Doug Baldwin. Well, guess what? After Baldwin's injury in week 1, now I think Lockett becomes the go-to guy for Russell Wilson. I realized Brendan Marshall was there, but Lockett is more familiar with that offense. That's why I like him better personally. And if you're a Doug Baldwin owner, you would be well advised to go ahead and add Tyler Lockett, in my opinion. We don't know the extent of Doug Baldwin's knee injury, so for the time being, Tyler Lockett would be a very welcomed addition to your roster. Next, I'm looking at a guy in Quincy Enunwa who missed all of last year with that neck injury, but he had a heck of a welcome back party last night on Monday night with 6 receptions for 63 yards and 1 touchdown with Sam Darnold under center, the rookie. But look, I think Enunwa can be, especially in PPR formats, more of that slot guy. I think he can be the Robbie Anderson of 2018. That's why I'm high on him, and not too bad of a matchup versus the Dolphins in week 2. Continuing on with Trent Taylor here of the 49ers, a guy that I think will benefit due to injuries, unfortunately, similar to Tyler Lockett, but in this situation, Marquise Goodwin and Trent Taylor, specifically I'm targeting him as the slot guy again, similar to Quincy Enunwa with the Jets. He only had 4 receptions for 28 yards, but keep in mind, that was versus a very good Vikings defense. And based on how much time Goodwin misses, I do think Trent Taylor, along with some other guys on that 49ers defense, get a nice boost. And especially this week versus a Lions defense that got absolutely torched by Darnold in week 1. Imagine what Jimmy Garoppolo can go ahead and do to them in week 2. Continuing on with a guy in Geronimo Allison of the Green Bay Packers, a guy that is more of a stash than a guy you would start in week 2, especially that the Packers are playing the Minnesota Vikings, that very tough divisional opponent, that very tough defense, and Aaron Rodgers' status is still up in the air. So for that reason, I probably go ahead, try and add Allison, but not necessarily play him. I love his potential, 5 receptions, 69 yards, and a touchdown, but who wouldn't when you're in an offense with Aaron Rodgers and the upside that brings? The final wide receiver on my list is Kenny Stills of the Dolphins, a guy that I was again mentioning heading into the start of the fantasy season. Finished that game with 4 receptions, 106 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Great performance. I realize it was on a limited number of catches, but look, I do think Kenny Stills is the #1 wide receiver now. Devontae Parker has had too many issues. Kenny Stills is also that big play guy, so I do like the potential here. And a guy that I would go ahead and have as a flex option with a very high ceiling. Moving on to our tight ends now, and who would have thought, but this is probably the position of most interest following the injuries to Delanie Walker and Greg Olsen. Walker is going to miss the entire season. Greg Olsen, we don't know what's going to happen with his foot, but the same foot that caused him to miss 8 weeks last year. And now, starting with the guy that I would target first, George Kittle. If he is available, go ahead and invest in Kittle. Marquise Goodwin is out. Kittle is going to be probably that next guy. I mentioned Trent Taylor, but I think Kittle benefits the most from this actually. He had 5 receptions for 90 yards, and I do like him as that security blanket for Jimmy Garoppolo. I like the matchup in week 2, and if Goodwin misses a lot of time, I think George Kittle can finish as a top 10 tight end. Moving on to a guy in Jared Cook next, who went absolutely ham last night. 9 receptions for 180 yards. Now, we'll see how much of that was due to the wide receivers of Oakland just not having a good day, not getting a lot of targets, not being really involved. But regardless, Cook dominated, was clearly the favorite target in the passing game for Derek Carr. And man, moving forward, especially if you are a team that suffered one of these tight end injuries, I do like the potential of Jared Cook. And under that Gruden system where he is more old school, he likes rushing the football, he likes his tight ends, he values them. I like Jared Cook, especially after the chemistry that I saw with Derek Carr last night. Next, I've got Will Dissly, a guy that had another big week at the tight end position, but nobody was talking about on the Seattle Seahawks. 3 receptions, 105 yards, and 1 touchdown. And look, just like how I said Tyler Lockett and Marshall were going to benefit from the Doug Baldwin injury, so will Dissly. With Jimmy Graham gone, he could potentially be the new Jimmy Graham for the Seattle Seahawks. And we saw Russell Wilson go his way a couple of times, and I realized it was only a limited number of receptions, but after that kind of stat line, you do have to go ahead and take notice. I think Dissly is going to be a highly added commodity this week. The last tight end on this list is Ian Thomas of the Panthers, a direct beneficiary of the Greg Olsen injury. Even though he only finished with 2 receptions for 4 yards, he is going to go ahead and have a much bigger ceiling now that Olsen is gone. He's pretty much tight end number 2, so he's going to fill in to that role. Now, he had a very nice preseason, had a lot of targets, gotten a lot of hype coming out of the draft and into camp. So from that perspective, I do like the potential there. Obviously, he won't be quite as good as Greg Olsen was. That's very hard to duplicate. But we do know Cam likes to go ahead and target the tight end position. Even though it's not Olsen, I do think Thomas will go ahead, get his opportunities in the red zone, in the short passing game, where Cam Newton sometimes prefers to go, and on an offense that doesn't necessarily take a lot of deep shots down the field. And finally, moving on to our most anticipated category, the defenses. Unfortunately, it's a short list this week because most of the defenses to target are already owned. Not the best matchups this week in terms of streaming opportunities, but let's still go ahead and try and see if we can make some magic happen. The first defense that I have, and I'm always going to have this defense, not necessarily this team, but the Chargers defense. Because they play the Buffalo Bills. That's what I meant. I'm going to have this defense every week. Whoever plays the Buffalo Bills, you better go ahead and add them, especially if you're streaming the defenses. We saw what the Ravens did to the Bills. Whoever starts, whether it's Allen, especially if it's Peterman, the Chargers defense, I think, is going to have a very good day. The second defense on this list is the New England Patriots. And look, it's primarily because they're going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Patriots were able to go ahead, limit a mobile quarterback in Deshaun Watson. We'll see how much of that was because maybe he was still a little bit rusty coming back from injury. But nonetheless, they get a much lower potential scoring offense in the Jaguars with Blake Bortles under center. We saw that the Jaguars struggled to put up big points versus the Giants. So I do think it'll be something similar, especially if Leonard Fournette isn't 100% versus the Patriots in week 2. The last defense on this list is that of the New York Jets. And man, I didn't think I'd be talking about the Jets defense this early on, but after that performance versus Matthew Stafford and the Lions in Detroit, you have to take notice because look, they did it in so many ways. The big reason why the Jets were successful in that game was because how many times they turned over Stafford. What they did in the return game, they had a touchdown there. They had a touchdown defensively. They had numerous picks, and now they go up against the Miami Dolphins, who I think are going to be sporadic throughout the season. For that reason, I like what Jamal Adams does in that secondary. I like their linebackers from what I saw versus the Lions. And then I also really like the pressure that they were able to apply with the front four. For that reason, I'm going to go ahead and take a chance on the Jets in week 2. So with that, we come to an end of our targets for week 2 waivers. As always, let me know what you guys thought. Are there guys that you wouldn't have on this list? Are there guys that you think I missed on this list? Let me hear it in the comment section along with any other questions you might have. And as always, if you enjoyed, make sure to like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in future videos.